years following World War II, the door to integration was cracked open. Black America's disillusionment with the pace of progress gave birth to a new, more militant civil rights movement. Blacks were no longer asking for rights, but demanding them.
I'm concerned, and you're concerned, with decent civil rights for all God's people.
Brown versus the Board of Education outlawed school segregation. The civil rights movement began to take shape. Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on the bus, sparking the Montgomery bus boycott, organized by a 26-year-old unknown minister.
Montgomery has been thrown into a peculiar position. We can well map out the strategy for the future of integration.
In many ways, the institution of sports contributed to the community's sense of betrayal. Joe Louis was the symbolic conquering hero abroad, yet black soldiers fought in segregated combat units. Jesse Owens shattered the myth of Aryan supremacy in Nazi Germany, while white racism in the United States never abated. Jackie Robinson symbolized the promise of integration and the destruction of black institutions to achieve it. In 1950, the black presence in sports was meager and marginal. In the NFL, there were a total of 19 blacks playing. And of 17 NBA teams, there were just 3 black players in the league. Nowhere, though, was the nation's racism more dramatically entrenched than in the sport of tennis. The assault on this sport was from the unlikeliest of people, a shy, strong-willed girl from Harlem whose race and social background went against everything that tennis stood for. Her name was Althea Gibson.
She was obviously a potential tennis champion. You could see it from the get-go. She was very competitive. She believed she can, if she come in here, she believed she could spit further than you. Anything you come up with, she could beat you doing it, you know?
She made things happen. Serve, come to the net, put the point away, end it, and that's it. She did not play around. She did not wait for people to make an error. She made you make the error.
Gibson cut her teeth in the All-Black American Tennis Association, but longed for the stronger competition found at the restricted and all-white United States Lawn Tennis Association.
I think the people at the top of the game were very uncomfortable in having her enter. In those days, the tournaments that mattered most to an American tennis player was the Eastern Grass Court Circuit. These were small, restricted clubs, played at such places as the Longwood Cricket Club in Boston, Essex County Club, and these were all invitational events.
Gibson needed an ally from within, and she got one in Alice Marble. A former singles champion, Marble dominated tennis in the 30s. In July of 1950, she wrote an editorial which brought the USLTA much embarrassment.
If tennis is a game for ladies and gentlemen, it's also time we acted a little more like gentle people and less like sanctimonious hypocrites. If Althea Gibson represents a challenge to the present crop of women players, it's only fair that they should meet that challenge on the courts where tennis is played.
A month later, Gibson broke through the color barrier and became the first African American to compete at the U.S. Championships at Forest Hills. But the attitudes of the tennis establishment remained unchanged.
She went through quite a lot, I think, questioning and exams and things like that a normal player wouldn't have to go through. They even did examinations to see that she was not a man or because she was a tall, gangly individual. So it was kind of tough on her.
Her match with the experienced Louise Bruff shook the seemingly unshakable tennis structure.
It was a sort of gradual breakthrough or breaking in. That historic day, lightning struck one of the eagles on the top of the stadium, knocking it off its pedestal. And I remember talking to her about that, and she said, yeah, that may have been a sign that things were changing.
Although Gibson lost to Bruff, a door was cracked open. Unlike basketball, football, and baseball, where the pioneer was followed by a stream of athletes, Gibson traveled the country club road alone, tolerated but never embraced. Gibson failed to win a major tournament for the next 6 years.
Well, Althea, not too long ago, you started branching out into show business. How's the new career coming?
Well, I think it's coming along all right, Ed. I've done a few things. I've written a book. I always wanted to be somebody, and I think it's a great story. And also, Ed, this is my first album. As a matter of fact, would you like to hear one of the selections?
Very much.
Wonderful. I think you will like it. It's Around the World. Around the world, I search for you.
I travel on when hope was gone to keep a rendezvous.
Finally, Althea's losing streak was ended, and in 1957, she became the first African-American to win Wimbledon.
You'd look at me.
She dominated tennis from 1956 through 1958. But as an amateur with no sponsorships, Gibson was unable to make a living. She pursued various other careers, including teaching, acting, and even a brief stint as the Globetrotters' opening act. Her triumphs propelled her into the record books, yet Gibson was never taken into the bosom of the United States. Like Jesse Owens, she was only a paper hero.
Well, you keep still, see? Oh, boy.
Although the color line of tennis had been broken, the deeply rooted racism in golf reduced the black presence to a vaudeville act. With this mentality, black golfers had virtually no hope of breaking into the segregated PGA.
Well, the thing about golf is you got to understand that golf was the first sport to integrate. If you consider a white golfer and a black caddy to be integration, that was integration as far as golf was concerned. There was a reason why country clubs looked like plantations, because they were plantations. It was an extension of that mentality.
To preserve its plantation atmosphere, the PGA inserted a Caucasian clause in 1943 that prevented blacks from competing in PGA events. Charlie Sifford would change that. Sifford dominated play in the all-black United Golfers Association and was set to prove that he could compete on a larger stage. But he was ignored by many tournament officials who would invoke the Caucasian clause at their own discretion.
Everything was a fight. You had to fight for the tennis, you had to fight for the golf, you had to fight for everything.
But if there was anyone you wanted fighting for you, it was Charlie Sifford.
Charlie was a very mean golfer, and I think that's what it takes. You can't be nice and composed. And Charlie would sit on the putting green and clean his nails with a knife before he would enter tournaments. This long.
Sifford's struggle caught the attention of those within the black community when Jackie Robinson wrote a letter in his behalf.
Since Charlie is endeavoring to make a living at his chosen craft, it constitutes a basic denial of economic opportunity when he is barred from membership in the PGA. Not only should court action be considered, but I feel the issue is one for a thorough investigation by the Civil Rights Commission.
Finally, the PGA relented. In 1959, Sifford was admitted as an approved player, a first for blacks in golf. 2 years later, the Caucasian clause was finally removed. Racism was not. Beyond the golf course and around the country, the sit-in movement took off when students in Greensboro staged a boycott protesting segregated lunch counters. This was a period of trade-offs. More African Americans were playing Major League Baseball, closing the door on the Negro Leagues forever. Ironically, the black colleges led the way for integration and unwittingly led to their own undoing. Black universities were historically where many of the world's greatest athletes were developed and where talented female athletes were nurtured. At Tennessee State, Coach Ed Temple took the concept to a new level with the Tennessee Tiger Bells.
He always said that first you were a lady, second you were a scholar, and third a Tiger Bell, in that order.
The first thing you had to do is to prove that young ladies could be a young lady and still be an athlete. So the first thing came in my mind, I wanted them to look good. And one of my mottos early in my career was, I want foxes, not oxes.
Men believe that, women involved in sports, you had problems, you didn't look feminine and all those things. I had to explain to the men that it would not harm the women or hurt the women for them to participate in track and field. That it would just make them a stronger individual and that it would not hinder them from having babies.
Temple's star pupil came along in the summer of 1960. She was a tall, attractive sprinter who pulled female athletes from the margins of sports to center stage. Her name was Wilma Rudolph.
Wilma was graceful in her running. She reminded me of Jesse Owens. Fluid stride, beautiful form, and she had that smile. She had that pleasing personality.
There had been great female athletes before her, but Wilma was the first to achieve international acclaim. Rudolph became known as the fastest woman alive, but as a child had obstacles to overcome.
I was very small. I think it was at the age of 3 or 4. I had polio, and there was a special type shoe that I had to wear at this age. I was carried back and forth to Nashville, which is about 45 miles from my hometown, about twice a week for different treatments. It gives you something to push for. It gives you determination, and it makes you want to do it. It's building from within.
Wilma changed the concept of the female track and field athlete for the African Americans as well as the white, that we could compete with the Europeans, that we were highly competitive, and that we did have what it took to be world class. And she proved it in 60.
100,000 crowd the Olympic Stadium in Rome for the elaborate ceremonies that open the 17th modern Olympiad.
With a bronze medal from the '56 Olympics already in tow, Rudolph would better that at the 1960 Games in Rome. Wilma's celebrity skyrocketed when she brought home gold medals in the 100, 200, and the 400-meter relay.
When we was in Germany after the Olympics, what the Germans claimed her as being a German because her name was Rudolph, her German name, and she couldn't put her sweat clothes down or her track shoes. Everybody just wanted a souvenir from Wilma. We got on the bus, we tried to get her on the bus. They was hollering, Wilma, Wilma. They even shook the bus. They just wanted to see her, they just wanted to touch her.
Unlike Gibson, Rudolph used the visibility she gained in track to participate in a movement that continued to gain momentum. She began by sensitizing her hometown of Clarksville, Tennessee, and refused to participate in a parade in her honor unless it was integrated.
She knew that this was not right, and that she was not going to be in a parade where the parade was segregated. Because then when they speak about Clarksville, they say Wilma Rudolph from Clarksville, Tennessee. They didn't say Wilma Rudolph from Black Clarksville, Tennessee. They said from Clarksville, Tennessee.
And that was the first time that they had an integrated parade in Clarksville, the first time they had a big integrated banquet. And I never will forget, the mayor got up and he talked about piano. He said, you got white keys and you got black keys. But in order to get good harmony, you got to play the white keys and the black keys. Both of them got to be playing together in order to get good music. And that set the tone for integration in Clarksville.
I have a dream. My 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream.
In 1963, more than 200,000 protesters marched on Washington. Police attacked demonstrators in Birmingham, and the country lost a beloved president. The escalation of the civil rights protest made it virtually impossible for anyone in the black community to remain neutral over the issue of race. For the growing number of black professional athletes, the dilemma of race was compounded by the paradox of celebrity.
As an athlete, people adored you in a superficial manner. It was through the fact that you pleased them as you exhibited this physical force, or even your mental ability on the field. As a man, they didn't pay very much attention to you. The irony is that when I played for 80,000 people in Cleveland Stadium, they would cheer. And then I couldn't go to a particular restaurant because I was a black man. So that cheering went out the window. I was dealing with why I couldn't go into that restaurant. You see, I didn't want to integrate, I just wanted my rights.
The new athlete, no longer pioneers or tokens, played with the force of men who knew they belonged. The catalysts for this new attitude were Jim Brown and Bill Russell, two athletes who refused to separate themselves from the swirling currents of race and economics in the black community.
Listen, you could take, now there, let's say there are 22 million Negroes in the United States. You could give every one of them $1 million and you wouldn't change anything.
Why is that?
You just wouldn't change anything because this thing is about people.
You
It's
mean-
not about, listen, economics, sure, this is important, very important. But this whole thing is about people.
Are you saying then that there are white people who will never accept Negro people? Is that what you mean?
Sure, and there are Negro people that will never accept white people.
When Bill Russell signed with the Celtics in 1956, he was the only black player on the team, but he had a reputation as a winner. At the University of San Francisco, he led the Dons to consecutive national championships. Russell so dominated the boards, the NCAA had to double the foul lane from 6 feet to 12.
The thing that impressed me most about Bill Russell was just the fact that he was very consistent. On the court, he wanted to win every single game. Now, this is every single game, bar none. And it wasn't the height of egotism at all. He just thought that he was what he was, the best defensive player in the game.
Historians say no one blocked shots before Russell. This much is for certain. No one blocked shots like Russell. No player created an intimidating presence on defense like Russell. He originated a whole new style of play.
It was no one smarter than Russell. I mean, the concept of blocking shots was one thing. The concept of blocking shots and blocking him in such a way, in such an angle, that he could grab the block shot and then have the presence of mind to begin the legendary Celtic fast break, all within one motion.
Russell led the Celtics to their first NBA championship in 1957. But while Russell was cheered in the Boston Garden, he had a love-hate relationship with the city itself.
People don't realize that Bill Russell suffered a lot while he played in Boston, even though they were winning championships. That did not quell, did not stymie some of the racism that he faced, not only for himself, but for his family as well.
I can remember him telling me of the difficulty of trying to purchase a house in Boston. Without them knowing who he was, he bought this house, and there were people throwing trash on the lawn, yelling obscenities, calling his home, doing all kind of crazy things because they didn't want any blacks in that area. Once they found out that he was a star player for the Boston Celtics, then the cookies came and the flowers came. And Bill Russell, in my opinion, never really got over that because he felt that he was accepted because he was an athlete and not because of the person.
Russell was the first to take a stand, and it didn't begin or end in Boston. At an exhibition game in Lexington, Kentucky, the black players were denied access to the hotel restaurant. Russell spoke up.
Russell said, you know, Reid, we don't want to play the game because we don't like the treatment that we're getting here. And Reid said, well, wouldn't it be better to play the game and let the press get a bunch of this, and wouldn't that be a much better approach to let the world know what's going on down here? And Russell said no. He said, if we don't play the game, that's message enough right there.
Bill Russell's similar to us wasn't that we saw him walking up and down streets, you know, marching, because Bill didn't do those things. Bill's effect for us was that he always stood as a man. I mean, when he spoke, it didn't matter what the color of the person he was speaking to. It was obvious that he was saying it to that man, whatever the color.
Is there any of you young people here that would like to be the President of the United States, Secretary of State, Ambassador to the United Nations? If you'd like to, don't give it up. You don't have to give it up, because in spite of everything, I want you to remember one thing. You can do anything that you want to do, if you want to do it bad enough. Thank you very much.
Just thank the Lord.
Destined to be a leader, Russell was named player coach of the Celtics in 1966, the first black head coach ever in the history of the NBA.
The New Yorkers run into a giant killer. Number 32, Jimmy Brown, makes tissue paper of the giant lion. There's no stopping the great man.
Jim Brown's entrance onto the scene was part of a steady progression of blacks in the NFL. They were a new breed of athlete: speed, flash, and independent spirits. As a rookie, Jim Brown led the league in rushing, and he continued this feat in 8 of the 9 seasons he played. As he became a greater force on the playing field, he spoke out more loudly.
If all we had to do was play football, it would have been easy. Based upon the political system and the situation in the country at that time, we had to carry ourselves a certain way. And because I was the so-called star of the team, I had the power to guide the individuals and show some leadership, and I took advantage of that.
Cleveland Browns' great all-pro fullback has traded his famous number 32 jersey for a business suit. This is the headquarters of the Negro Industrial and Economic Union, of which Brown is co-founder.
We are trying to help the Negro people, period. We have a youth program. We have a program of financing businesses. We have many programs because we feel it is necessary to have many programs to reach all of the Negroes that are in need.
Jim Brown's Black Economic Union was formed through the solidarity of successful black athletes and entrepreneurs in an attempt to create greater opportunities for blacks in business.
Your organization is the first time in the history of professional athletics where a black man have a chance now to make money off of the field that they have made famous.
When I came up with the concept, it was readily picked up by a lot of individuals because they had some kind of knowledge that this would be the best way to bring about change. And I combined the athlete with the young MBAs. And that combination was a very powerful one because they understood if we got economic power, then that would be the power that would bring about the greatest change.
Through that union, we began to push blacks in the community to reach out for a piece of the pie. Train yourselves. In fact, we set up training programs to teach blacks how to get into business, how to maintain your acumen in business, how to go get the money. But it made all of us very, very strong because we felt that we had something to present to the community.
Brown's Black Economic Union picked up steam, opening offices in several cities, and endeavored to pull in every significant black athlete in the country. The athlete they had in mind was a charismatic young heavyweight from Louisville, Kentucky. Cassius Clay became heavyweight champion on February 25, 1964, in one of the great upsets in boxing, when Charles Sonny Liston failed to answer the bell for the 7th round.
I am the king of the world. Hold it. Hold it. You're not that pretty. I'm a bad man. Wait. I shook up the world.
He's an act. He's entertainment. He's all mouth. He's just this wonderful, vibrant character.
He was not self-effacing. He was demanding of respect. He was demanding of recognition. And so he became kind of an icon for the new modern black athlete.
Cassius is not my name no more.
Officially Muhammad Ali now.
Muhammad Ali, right. Muhammad Ali. That's my name.
Malcolm X became the first black leader to understand the urgency of bringing black athletes into the political fold. Muhammad Ali became the Nation of Islam's most famous convert. Public opinion was mixed. He was either loved or hated. But Muhammad Ali dominated his opponents and the business of boxing.
Bob Arum and I started talking about having Muhammad Ali control all of his business affairs, that all the ancillaries now could be controlled by a company that Ali controlled. And so we put together a company called Main Bout, which created opportunities for black athletes to exhibit the fight via closed circuit, which was the first time that happened in history. So Ali became the first major athlete to take control of all of his business affairs.
Ali's success did not prevent him from being called to serve his country.
His draft board changes his draft status from being ineligible to being eligible for the draft. And when this happens, he is besieged by reporters, absolutely besieged.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Muhammad Ali has just refused to be inducted into the United States Armed Forces.
And boom, there's the story. Then he becomes truly political.
I said that I'm going to be a man, I'm going to fight it legally. If I lose it, I'm just going to jail.
In one defiant act, Ali fused both civil rights and anti-war movements. He became a compelling symbol for his generation.
I got a call from Herbert Muhammad, who was his manager at the time, and the son of Elijah Muhammad, and Herbert said to me secretly that they would not mind Ali going into the service. But publicly, they couldn't take that stance. So I said, if I got the most powerful black athletes in the country to have a meeting in my office in Cleveland, and we could talk to Ali, try to find out the reason that he didn't want to go. The night before I talked to Ali, I knew that he wasn't going to go in no service.
After about 2.5 hours of discussion, and I might add very friendly discussion, we decided that in our hearts, the champ is sincere in his religious beliefs.
I mean, he was threatened in every way, told to apologize, otherwise they wouldn't let him fight. And he stood up and proclaimed himself a black Muslim at the time. That was the worst thing you could ever do.
Who's the heavyweight champion of the world?
When Ali was stripped of his title, he became more than a sports hero. He became a legend. Ali was embraced as a courageous dissenter who symbolized the conflicts that divided the country.
It doesn't matter whether you agree with his being a Muslim or not, or whether you agree with his stand against the war or not. It was just that he defined himself and said, I'm not going to let white people define me or the white establishment define me. He defined himself on a huge stage at a time when black people were very interested in reshaping and remolding themselves as a people.
A season of frustration, racial unrest, senseless war, inner city riots, the loss of a dream.
The mood of the 60s was dark and somber. And merely because you're a professional athlete, it does not defend you from that.
When I was asked how did I feel about the unrest in the U.S. and what was happening, the mistreatment of blacks, I would always say that I grew up with it, I understand it, I know what it is, I feel something has to be done with it. And who's to say where the battlefield is, if it's on the athletic field or if it's in politics. Something needs to be changed and somebody has to make a statement.
The 1968 Olympic trials set the stage for the most dramatic political protest in modern sports history. Black athletes debated the form their protest would take. San Jose State professor Harry Edwards called for a boycott of the games in Mexico City.
It became very, very clear that sport was much like the rest of society, the same kinds of limitations, the same kinds of ideological assumptions, the same kinds of constraints on opportunity and on virtually every other dimension of black life that you found in the rest of society.
We will let you know about the future of your Olympic team when we deem it proper and when we feel that you can handle that kind of information. Right now, we just don't think that you're ready.
In sports, I think, people looked at an athlete and they listened to what he had to say, and Dr. Edwards was smart enough to look at that and say, hey, we need to say more things than how fast we ran the 100 or how long we hit a ball or how far we shot a jump shot. We need to start speaking out. And he started to organize folks and started to make these folks say and do some things that society became very uncomfortable with.
The black community was divided over this new militancy and the possibility of a boycott.
I deplore the idea of where politics will enter into the Olympic Games because, as you know, the Olympic Games was set up to dispel any political or religious faith that, that might be invoked into the Games itself.
If today
the conditions were the same, and the Negroes breaking in, and I was that Negro breaking in, I would join these protests so that my children and their children wouldn't have to go through the same things that I went through trying to break down discrimination.
After a year of debate over the boycott, black team members decided to join their fellow Olympians in Mexico City, but they were still uncertain about what to do to call attention to conditions in black America.
There had been meetings inside the Olympic Village about what are we going to do as athletes when we go to compete. How are we going to express to the world that the unfair treatments of blacks in America? And there was no plan. There was no master plan. This is how you do it. This is what you do.
We could not come to a consensus that would unite everybody. Everybody tie a string around your finger. Everybody do this. Everybody do that. So the decision was made. Everybody would do their own thing.
On the 5th day of the Olympics, 2 black Americans made a statement.
It's John Carlos right now. It's Carlos and Smith. And here comes Tommy Smith. Smith has done it with his hands in the air.
.200-meter medalists Tommy Smith and John Carlos stunned the world by raising their gloved fists in protest.
It was just like anybody going on a victory stand. And everybody was in the stands were like, what's happening here? And we were all shocked, and I think we all stood more to attention at the national anthem than ever, because we were like, what is going on?
The right glove that I wore on my right hand signified the power within black America.
You could almost hear the wind blowing around my fist. It was just that quiet. Then there was a buzz. But I heard Lee Evans very, very vividly said, "Oh, shit."
And the next thing I know, people were beginning to mobilize their forces, and the idea was to get these guys out of the Olympic Village. Just get rid of them.
Where are you going, Carlos? I'm going home.
The USOC gave John Carlos and Tommy Smith 24 hours, I do believe, to leave Mexico City. They also told us to come to the Olympic quarter so they can take our medals back.
And I asked the question. I said, okay, if you're going to kick them out of the village, are you going to use their medal count too in the U.S. medal count? Are you going to do that? Nobody answered that question. And if you remember, the Soviet Union at that time had occupied Prague, Czechoslovakia, and a Czech gymnast in Mexico City won a bunch of medals, and every time on the victory stand, she made a protest.
And again, she has turned her head to the right and down, just as she did at the last ceremony. This does not appear to be an accident.
No one ever made an issue of that one. And I just thought, wow, there's another indication of the ideas that, yeah, there is some difference in this country. There is very definitely some difference.
Smith and Carlos did make a difference since their medals were included in the final count. Black Olympians took home nearly half the medals won by the U.S. team. Black Olympians in Mexico City called attention to America's problems at home. Through the power of one dramatic, silent gesture, Smith and Carlos made a giant leap and challenged America to follow.
60 seconds.
Even as Apollo 11 landed, the nation wrestled with the lingering problem of race.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Vietnam was dividing America as it had not been divided since the Civil War. Anti-war and civil rights protesting continued, but the conservative silent majority had spoken. Under the Nixon administration, there would be less tolerance for dissent. By 1969, college campuses had become the nation's epicenter of protest. Under the influence of the Black Power movement, students demand more black culture in the curriculum, more black professors, and more black players on the field.
We haven't had so far many, if any, that qualified academically and athletically both, but I certainly feel like that there'll be some in here in the near future that do. I think we'll have some fine athletes.
And the future came quickly. Predominantly white schools soon realized that the key to winning was to recruit the best athletes, regardless of color.
All those schools that have been traditional football powers and that never really had a lot of black people on campus in general began cherry picking the best and the brightest with scholarships, sports cars, with all the perks that come with a big-time sports program.
The defining moment came in the fall of 1970. Bear Bryant's Alabama Crimson Tide was routed at home by the University of Southern California. Black running back Sam Bam Cunningham ran for over 200 yards, defeating the all-white Alabama team.
At the American Football Coaches Association, when I walked in the dining room to eat, the Alabama staff said, "Hey, you come over here." So I went over to talk to them, and the guy told me, he said, if I told you that Cunningham, the running back for California, did more for integrating football in the South than any of your leaders have done in years, would I disturb you? I said, no, what do you mean? He said, man, this guy came over and he scored 2 or 3 touchdowns. And when the game was over, our fans were saying, get us one, get us one.
Seated with the fans that day was freshman Wilbur Jackson. The following fall, Wilbur Jackson became Alabama's first black scholarship football player.
I mean, you look at Alabama's football team today. Jesus. There's nothing but brothers out here on Ole Miss. When Bear Bryant began recruiting black players, and you knew, hey, the world was changing.
The face of sports was changing, and black players became a critical part of the transition.
Just move on up toward your destination.
Arthur Ashe won the U.S. Open. Lou Alcindor, pursued by the NBA and ABA, went to the Milwaukee Bucks. Willie Mays chased 3,000 hits, and 2 black warriors staged the fight of the century. In all sports, the black athlete was finally being recognized and rewarded. Baseball's Curt Flood was one of the elite few approaching the then magical $100,000 salary. But the owners were in control. Written into player contracts was a reserve clause giving them the right to buy, sell, or trade a player at their whim. After 12 years with the St. Louis Cardinals, Curt Flood was traded to the Phillies and ordered to report to Philadelphia immediately.
It's been a master and slave relationship. As long as you do what I say do, you're fine.
Flood decided to challenge the reserve clause in court. He received the support of Marvin Miller and the Players Union.
Marvin Miller said, do you know what you're up against? Precedents have been set in the past where other men have tried that and lost. We do know for sure several things are going to happen if you do this, Curtis. You'll never get in the Hall of Fame, you'll never manage a major league team, and you may have played your last baseball game.
After a 2-year legal battle, the Supreme Court rejected his suit. It was fitting that an African-American player fought for freedom for all players. The reserve clause was finally overturned when Dave McNally and Andy Messersmith won a lower court decision in 1975. Flood was not alone in challenging the owner's hold on players. NBA All-Star Oscar Robertson sued to overturn basketball's version of the reserve clause. Tight end John Mackey won a suit against football's right to control a player's future, but it took the 5-time NFL All-Pro almost 20 years to make the Hall of Fame. Flood returned to the Washington Senators for a disappointing season. He never made it to the Hall of Fame.
I thought it was very courageous, and I mean that sincerely. But I said I thought he was a little crazy to be going up against the establishment, especially being a black ball player.
I didn't really think about it one way or the other. I think I'm kind of a rebel, really. I thought that he did a great thing. I said, hey, if Kurt Flood want to do it, so be it, And yet, back in those days, you defy management, you weren't finished, especially if you were black, because you couldn't do it.
Kurt Flood challenged the rules of baseball. Hank Aaron challenged its tradition.
3-1 pitch. There's a drive into left field. That ball is going, and out of here. Henry Aaron has just tied Babe Ruth in the all-time home run parade.
After all the accomplishment that I personally have had, and then I can walk through the airport sometime, and people probably say, who is that? Who is that? Not that I think that everybody should know me, but I guarantee you if Babe Ruth walked through there, everybody was there, and he's been dead for 20-some years, people would try to say, that's Babe Ruth.
Hank Aaron was one of the most popular players ever. A 23-year veteran, record-holding MVP, All-Star, and World Series hero, Hank hoped that by challenging Babe Ruth's record, he would change the future for the black athlete.
If I break this record, I don't know what it means. I hope that it means that there will be better jobs for blacks in baseball, and I also hope that it means that one day before I retire that we're going to see a black manager on some ball club.
But his hopes for the future were clouded by messages of hate.
Dear black boy, we don't want no nigger Babe Ruth. I hope you don't break the Babe's record. How do I tell my kids that a nigger did it? Dear nigger, everybody loved Babe Ruth. You'll be the most hated man in this country.
Babe Ruth is the largest thing, the biggest thing that ever happened in baseball. Nobody will ever replace Babe Ruth. No matter who comes along and break his record, it's always going to be an asterisk behind it. I did it, and people start saying, well, he did it in 23 years. He went to plate 1,000 more times than Babe Ruth. There's always an asterisk behind it. So it was really some hard time that I had to go through simply because of one thing. One thing, that's all, because of the color of my skin.
Hank Aaron was quoted as saying, "I don't want them to forget Ruth. I just want them to remember me."
Gentlemen, today we're officially stamping the appointment of Frank Robinson as the player manager of the Cleveland Indians.
If I had one wish that could be answered right today, that is the one wish I would have, that Jackie Robinson could be here to see this happening, this moment.
Frank Robinson was among baseball's elite. He was the first player to win MVP honors in both leagues. In 1974, after nearly 20 years in the game, he was to become a major league manager. But he was also expected to play.
You always had to bring something extra as a black player. You couldn't just be a regular type player with the regular tools to be successful. You had to be able to run, hit, throw, and field. And if you weren't black, you could do one or two, or a couple of those things and still be successful. And that's the same way when blacks started stepping into management roles. You had to bring something extra, and that extra was player manager. Opening day was just basically the excitement of opening day, first managing job, first game. Phil Sager said to me, he says, "Why don't you put yourself in the lineup?" I said, "Me?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "Put yourself in there, you're probably at a home run." I said, yeah, sure. He said, no, you usually rise to the occasion. I know you do. Over the course of your career, you've always risen to the occasion. So I said, oh, okay, I didn't put much stock in it. So I just went downstairs and I got the lineup card out and put down the first hitter. And I'm sitting there and I said, So I wrote Robinson in there as a DH.
After proving himself in his first game and eventually becoming manager of the year, Frank Robinson cherished his place among the firsts.
Thank goodness for Jackie Robinson. I think him all the time, almost every day of my career, and still do. I'm just sorry that he could not have been around to see that, because I think that was one of his last wishes that he made. I'd like to live long enough to see a black man in the dugout managing a Major League Baseball team.
You know, there's nothing like being the black first. The people who were the black first have a certain kind of, the ones who survived being the black first, have a certain kind of strength and a certain kind of clarity about themselves. Because constantly, people are trying to cut you down. You can't make it. You're looked upon as this oddity. I mean, it's just amazing to get through all of that.
When people look at me, that he's a Negro before anything else. That's the way it is. But now it's, well, it's almost like money in the bank for me now, in a way. In this world of tennis now, being the only one, I'm a drawing card, whether I like it or not. And the fact that I am Negro makes it that way. So I say, why not capitalize on it?
Arthur Ashe had to gain success in the white tennis world to become the only one. But like Althea Gibson, Ashe refined his game in the black tennis organizations before becoming a champion at the Australian and U.S. Opens. Even with these successes, he was apprehensive about assuming a pioneer's role.
I've always seen myself as one who had to fight myths. Two in particular. One was that athletes in general are dumb, and in particular, black athletes, possibly even dumber than the normal or average athlete. That's always been a sore spot with me, and I've always been sometimes pleasantly amused, but at the same time angry when some white club member at some all-white club would come up to me and comment on how well I spoke or how well my manners were.
To look at him, Arthur Ashe did not fit the mold of a 60s-style activist.
Arthur was that different example. Arthur was that general manager on the floor. Articulate, quiet, soft-spoken, competitive as hell. Good at what he did. The boy from the other side of the tracks. We're different. We're not all one thing. And looking at him, I said, damn, he doesn't look like the kid from my neighborhood, but I'd be damned if he doesn't look like me.
Like Muhammad Ali, Ashe used the sports arena as a platform. Quietly, consistently demanding that African American youth balance athletics with education.
If you really pin all of your hopes on trying to be a pro athlete, no matter what the sport is, you really, in essence, make a bet with yourself. You're betting that if I play basketball, the time the school lets out till the time my mother says, you gotta come home, one day I'll be Walt Frazier. The odds are, statistically, he won't make it. Not only will he not make it, he will have nothing to put in its place.
In 1975, Arthur Ashe became the first black man to win the Wimbledon tournament in England. But that was not enough. He would dedicate his life to encouraging youth to soar beyond their limits and to changing conditions for black people throughout the world. Blacks used the gains of the 50s and 60s at the ballot box, electing more black representatives. Forced busing to integrate schools angered the no longer silent majority. After years of undeclared war, President Nixon brings the troops home from Vietnam. He was forced to withdraw from office in disgrace in the aftermath of Watergate.
I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow.
He became the first president to resign.
Dynamite!
Television exposed white America to black life.
Many of you black people are fine, decent people, as you probably know. Yeah, so I've heard.
This is a bad one. Oh!
Music provided the perfect canvas for the full expression of black style. And sport carried that style out on the field.
Style is extremely important in the Afro-American athlete. It is an expression of our culture, of ourselves, and as far back as I can remember watching some of the great black athletes, you know, they're always the first to put the finger in the air, number one. They're always there, you know, high-fiving.
You get spiking the ball in the end zone. You get the chest bump. You get the dancing in the end zone, all of which are expressions of black joy and satisfaction at achievement that cannot be expressed through the standard language created by white culture.
But nowhere was this sense of style expressed with greater creativity than on the street courts. The Mecca was the Rucker, a legendary Harlem tournament where pros like Wilt Chamberlain and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar came to play against the best on the block.
The Rucker tournament was something that was the source of legend and folklore in New York City, and every ball player wanted to play in it.
The most famous Rucker player was professional legend Julius Erving. He never lost the flair and style he learned on the street courts.
When Julius was going to play, he filled the park. And I'm not just talking about what was in the park, the seats. He filled the trees, he filled the buildings, he filled the school and back. Guys, you know, just in the trees, on the roof. You know, I mean, backed up on the roof.
Dr. J came from Rucker. They called him the Surgeon General. The science behind the name Surgeon General was if you laid it up, the doctor would operate on your shot on the backboard.
If he had never played in the Rucker, he would have never been that player. He'd just been another high-jumping guy with big hands. You understand what I'm saying? That's all he would have been. He wouldn't have had the move, the charisma, the flair, the style. You know, he might have been the long-arm stretch dunks because he got that, but he wouldn't have came with the flying around the basket, the reverses. He got that from the Rucker, you know?
In the 70s, the NBA was not the only show in town. The American Basketball Association nurtured the styles of the street and reinterpreted the rules of the game.
There was a lot of romance to it back then. It's so different than it is today. I mean, yeah, you've got a player like Jordan who, when he was in his prime, there was a lot of romance around him. But in those days, there was a lot of romance about the whole league, the ABA, the playground. It was very similar to the Rucker tournament. They were allowed to express themselves every time down court. The coaches didn't run the league. It was a players' league, and they played to the fans, and they played to the very last row.
In the 1976 season, the ABA played its final championship. MVP Julius Erving led the Nets to victory. When the ABA joined the NBA, Dr. J led a league of fans to Philadelphia and became the ambassador of street ball. Through the 70s, the black athlete continued to redefine sports. The Elder was the first to play in the Masters. Kareem made the hook an art form. Ali made boxing a ballet. Walter Payton sweetly redefined unstoppable. The Montreal Olympics introduced a new face with a new style. And the World Series in New York City made Reggie a household name. The emergence of televised sports and the explosion of the black athlete converged to create a highly visible, highly marketable superstar.
The face of athletics changed. I think the changing came from the media. If he's good, they can make a star.
This may come to you
as a great shock, but I read jock.
Hey, Aaron, get your Wheaties!
I want my maple.
The notion that African Americans could not appeal to the mainstream market was forever erased by O.J. Simpson.
When you're a star running back, you have to maintain a certain image.
Long before the controversial life of O.J. Simpson was revealed, his achievements on the football field led to superstardom. For 4 of his 10 seasons, he led the league in rushing. O.J., the 1973 Player of the Year, was the first to rush for over 2,000 yards in a single season. Once television showed us what was beneath the helmet, it was easy to understand why he was such a success. His resonant voice and charismatic good looks were perfect for the camera. But it was one commercial that grabbed America's attention. This was the first long-standing relationship between the corporate world and the black athlete.
Oh, man. He was it. And he was an inspiration for all of the black youth coming along, that one day they would get an endorsement. And now you have it in basketball, you got it in football with Emmett and the other guys. I think he was the leader. He opened the door.
Beautiful.
Big business added more black athletes to the list.
Thanks, Mean Joe.
In 1980, it was big business that supported Reaganomics. Voters, looking for a new beginning, elected a new leader. Jimmy Carter was driven out of office by the circumstances of a poor economy and an ineffective foreign policy. But Ronald Reagan's agenda failed to address everyone. In 1984, Reagan was challenged by minority voices. Reverend Jesse Jackson, leader of the Rainbow Coalition.
The championship. Our time has come.
Geraldine Ferraro, the first female vice presidential candidate, and all women demanding equal rights. Still, inequities were even greater for black women.
The endorsement opportunities have not been there for black women Americans. I remember I was at the same Olympics, 1984, with Mary Lou Retton. And I won a gold medal, or she won a gold medal. But I certainly don't remember my face being on the front of Wheaties.
Iced tea made with Lipton instant tea.
I don't know why it is that black women do not get them. It doesn't matter what sport. I used to think, well, it's just track and field, that's why. But it's not just track and field, because there are other black women in other sports who have done just as good, if not better, and they still have not gotten the recognition.
If you make it to number 6 in the world, definitely get you that endorsement. Okay, so you're 6 in the world now. If you make it to 4 in the world, I'm sure you're going to get that endorsement. Make it to 4 in the world, nobody even knocks on my door. I'm 5 in the world, go 5 years without even having one endorsement. I mean, that's like totally unheard of.
Eventually, Garrison became one of the few to receive endorsements.
Hard work, you can accomplish.
But for most African American women, the recognition continued to elude them.
Do you need me to be more articulate? Do you need me, to be more feminine looking? Do you need me to be more soft-spoken? Do you need me to, be a little more colorful? What is it that I need to be? Because there's certain things that I can't change. I can't change the fact that I'm a woman. I certainly can't change the fact that I'm black.
The endorsement market is, in fact, dominated by the black male athlete, selling everything from shoes to underwear.
Impossible.
The quintessential player and the ultimate endorser, Michael Jordan. In 1984, he signed with the Chicago Bulls. His extraordinary ability to virtually hang in space made him known as Air Jordan. He was 3 times league MVP, 9 times an All-Star, and has the highest career scoring average in the history of basketball. He led his team to 3 consecutive NBA championships. Michael Jordan's fame is equal to that of Hollywood screen stars and international heads of state. What more could the black athlete achieve?
Give me that ball.
something real familiar about that bunny.
Who do you think you are?
Jordan is not even perceived as a human. He is some other being in our society. And that's, I mean, you know, that's from Jack Johnson all the way up. Michael Jordan's greatest legacy will probably not be the 3 championships he won. It'll be the transformation of a black athlete into a pop cultural icon that supersedes the game.
The journey of the African-American athlete has been a unique odyssey. From Isaac Murphy to Michael Jordan, Althea Gibson to Jackie Joyner Kersee. The century-long journey has been a story of heroic feats and historic firsts. It is also the story of a nation's struggle to reconcile its painful legacy of racism with a deep-seated belief in fair play. At virtually every juncture, the black athlete has faced barriers. The grace with which they met these challenges has touched and enriched the lives of all Americans. In many ways, the black athlete symbolizes the essence of the American ideal: sacrifice, perseverance, hard work, and courage. But there are concerns that some black athletes have lost their way, failing to build on a noble legacy. Despite individual successes, African Americans have failed to achieve comparable power in a sprawling empire they helped build. While black athletes represent over 50% of all professional football, baseball, and basketball players, they make up less than 10% of management. The black athlete is at a crossroads. There are many signs, an abundance of directions, and one compelling question: where do we go from here?
This has been a presentation of HBO Sports, the network of champions.